Second hour is a little something we want to spend a little more time on. Today, we're going to be talking with Bill McLaughlin from AI Media. AI Media specializes in captions, and how to do that live. And so we're pretty excited about having him here. AI Media does a wide range from stuff that is AI as well as hardware like EEG. So we'll definitely stack your questions up for Bill. He'll be here in the second hour. Tomorrow, of course, we have education, and we don't broadcast that currently from 8 to 10, and then at 10 o'clock we're going to continue our little maker bit process with Roger Wagner. We had so much fun last week, and we're going to be programming this week, so it should be a good time. Of course, Sunday is the philosophical week, for philosophical days. We just kind of talk about what we're doing and why we're doing it. And another quick reminder that the Todd Reynolds Experience will be at noon Pacific Standard Time, and he's going to be doing a concert for all of you. And you can either watch us do the production from the back end, or you can watch his show on YouTube. So stay tuned for that. All right, let's go ahead and jump into the questions. Bill, what do we have?
Our first one this morning comes from the 7th Scroll in Brooklyn, New York, and the question is, how do you decide when to use streamdeck's app versus companion to control other hardware and or software? Also, does adding streamdeck to its own computer change how it's used?
Go ahead, Jason.
All right, so I'll take those in order. I decide by not deciding. If I like a Stream Deck, I'm using it. I think I have 3 or 4 of them because they do become very handy for very bespoke things. Does adding it to the computer change how it's used? Yes, if you want to control other things from the other computer. But more importantly, there's a much easier way to do that. Just get Companion Pi, plug it into its own Raspberry Pi, and don't waste a computer on it.
Go ahead, Peter.
Well, I learned a long time ago, don't mix the two. So I just use Companion and take the time to learn to program the Companion macros, for lack of a better word, and do it that way. And I haven't found anything I can't do in Companion that I can't do in the Stream Deck provided app. And the reverse is not true. And to agree with Jason, just put it on its own computer, whether it's a Pi or something else. And you could do all sorts of things. I mean, I've got mine hooked up to a B-Link by Courtney.
Next question.
Next question comes from John Foltz in Sealands Grove, Pennsylvania. And he says, since the new Mac Studio has 4 USB-C outputs, I got to thinking of new workflows. Could I get one or more of the USB-C outputs to SDI with a simple cable adapter, or does that need more hardware?
Go ahead, Courtney.
I haven't seen any USB with DisplayPort converters directly to SDI. I think your best bet is to go output to HDMI, and those are very common. Apple makes them, and a lot of third parties make USB-C with DisplayPort signal on them to HDMI converter, and then you just have to short HDMI cable to something like this, which would be the MD-LX. That's about the cheapest you could get out. It's a dual directional, $99. So that's a good way. MDHX is, of course, a much more capable version of the same thing. You can also use it as a distribution amplifier and a signal monitor. It tells you what type of signals are going in and out. It has a little LCD display, so it's very handy there. And it will also cross-convert. I don't know if the LX will actually scan convert to different frame rates, which you might have to do if you're coming out of a Mac, because we haven't seen what frame rates they're coming out with.
Go ahead, Jason.
I heard this a little bit differently. In the past, the limitation of the number of displays that you've had on a Mac has mostly to do with the number of Thunderbolt lanes that can directly be converted into DisplayPort. To that end, if you find yourself running into this limitation, I would use a Duo 2. There are a lot of pieces of software that would allow you to make that a separate display or output that directly. But I wouldn't go there because it will get messy.
Yeah, so I think you can actually, and this is something I'm going to test relatively soon when mine shows up, late March, early April, according to Apple, is I think you could actually get 4 SDI outputs from this, or 4 HDMI. I think what you want to do is get a USB-C to HDMI cable, and then the cheapest way to go would actually be the Blackmagic mini converter that'll convert from HDMI to SDI for like $48 or $49. And so for each one of those, and I've got a bunch of them now, you won't be able to control cameras for some, if you needed to do that, you would need the bidirectional, which is a little more expensive. But I think that it won't do scaling, but it will put the raw feed out. And I think you can get 4. One of the things I'm really interested in for that is building a small event, system and using the Extreme and getting 4 outputs out, using Zoom ISO to push those out to those things and kind of set up some processing there so that you can kind of get to almost anybody that might be speaking. And then you can add your graphics and you can add a lot of other things. So I think it's pretty interesting stack that's going to be possible out of this. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, I think from what I understand, I think it's going to be really simple if you just wanted to get 4 HDMI outputs. I don't think the scaling is an issue. Is that what you were referring to?
Yeah, no. If you had to get a specific frame rate, you won't be able to convert to it. Like, I don't know if the Mac will do 2997 as an example, but if you're going into an Extreme, it doesn't matter. But if you're going out to something that's sensitive to the 2997 or 5994, you might need something to convert it.
Well, the MacBook Pro will actually lock
5
that.
displays.
What were you saying, Jason?
Sorry, the MacBook Pro, the most recent MacBook Pro will let me lock, so I could do 2997 just on a random HDMI output. So I think it won't be an issue.
That's great. Yeah, I do think it's 5 total with the one in the front that you could get that out, and then that's not even using the little dual outputs that we have. Oh, you don't like those, Chris? You're done with them.
It's not that I'm done with them. I still have a Mac Mini that's attached to.
Angry.
You know me well. Yes,
passionate.
I am the angry one.
Yeah. Anyway, what were you gonna say?
But they're a pain because you have to use the little fake software. The ability to get 4 HDMI pins off the back plus 4 USB to HDMI cables, that should go. I think that'll go straight into the ATEM.
And remember that, like, for us, for office hours, I mean, the thing that went through my head was for office hours, we're doing a Mac Mini for every 4 outputs. And we theoretically could, well, I guess it wouldn't matter. We'd still be in the same.
It's still the same thing. Just wouldn't have to do the Sonnet and the card. But what's the cost of the Sonnet, the card, and a Mac Mini? I believe it's cheaper than one Studio, correct?
It
by
would
far.
be, yeah.
And you're getting to SDI, which is what you need for the Constellation. So you've done the best thing, I think.
Yeah. No, I think it works.
See how you do that, everybody? That's how you build up Alex, and then you become the favorite.
I think Chris assumes he's my favorite. Anyway, next question.
Burn day. The Seventh Scroll in Brooklyn says, "Morning, guys. In what use cases would you choose a Blackmagic web presenter versus an Amazon Elemental link? Which one would you prefer overall?"
Go, Jason.
The most obvious answer is if you are streaming directly to Amazon, use an Amazon link. But also, if you don't really want to have very much setup, it is designed, the Blackmagic Web Presenter is designed to be a perfect, dead simple way to just, get the stream up and just output your, broadcast.
If you're streaming all the time, the link will get expensive because you have to use the AWS infrastructure. So if you want to stream directly to YouTube or Facebook, then the web presenter. If you're doing it all the time or leaving it on or doing a lot of other things, I think the web presenter is probably better. The encoding quality, the web presenter only does 2 channels. So if you want to do multiple languages, if you want to do other things like that, it'll be there. The link will be much more robust as far as managing any kind of fluctuations in your bandwidth. So it's going to be a much higher quality stream. You may not be able to see it, so then it doesn't matter. but it is a higher quality stream. It's going to be more stable. It's going to take more channels. It's going to be easier to manage from a distance. Because you just plug it in. You don't configure anything on it. You just plug it in and take over from the web. So those are some of the advantages. I mean, I think that on a day-to-day basis, for most people, a web presenter would probably do a great job. But if it matters, I'd probably use a link. Next question.
Paul Bushin, Buchan, I'm sorry about that. Columbus, Ohio says, "With all the tech that we use daily having open APIs, I'm curious what languages or path you all recommend for someone in our industry getting into programming specifically."
You go, John.
Paul, thank you for your question. I would learn JavaScript first, which is going to lead you into Node. And then I would also learn SQL in parallel path to that.
You go ahead, Peter.
Well, on top of what John just said, if you're a Mac user, go ahead and take the dive into Swift so you can understand their environment, particularly if you're trying to do UIs and things like that. But then I'm on the other end of John. I'm extremely old school. I program in assembler language.
That's great. That's great. Yeah. I will say that, if you go towards the most common languages, then you're also competing with the most number of people. I can tell you that anybody who is proficient with Swift and Swift UI is getting hired, like right now, because there just aren't that many people. And I see it on Twitter. I follow a lot of programmers, and I see every day we're looking for someone who knows Swift and Swift UI constantly, because people are realizing that they're not going to be able to. They're going to have to. Companies are getting to a point where they know that they're not going to be able to continue to use Objective C forever, and so they're trying to make the turn, and they need to hire people to do it. So it's not the most popular, and it's not the most, but and it's not the widest swath of the base, but there's a really high demand for it at the moment. Next question.
A lot of iDevices out there. Douglas Carmichael, do you think the M1 Ultra would give as great a performance increase for audio applications as it does for video?
I'm going to go with Jason.
I love Douglas's questions because it feels like he's trying to talk himself into getting this. Like, is it worth it? Should I do it? The answer is yes, absolutely. Of course it will, with the big caveat that what you're running audio things for are targeting properly and writing to metal.
Yeah, and I don't know. I really don't know how much you'll feel the difference between the Ultra and the Max. But in an average audio program, if you're starting to stack up 90 to 200 tracks or something like that with tons of effects and tons of other things, you may see it. It just depends on how complex your systems are.
Well, and for audio, I've yet to upset the M1. For just pure audio, you never flinches.
Yeah, that's what I've seen. So I haven't been able to. I've been opening other people's projects that have 90 tracks and tons of synths and I'm at like 30% on the Mac Mini. So I think you'd have to push it really hard to push the Ultra or push past the Max. Next question.
Tony Mobley, our friend from Noonan, Georgia, is here with, I'm co-host on a House of Worship Zoom meeting. Is there a way for me to provide lower thirds for others participating? And he says, please forgive me for asking again, but that's what we're here for.
Yeah, you have to control. You have to be able to control their side to really do it. I think we talked about this a little earlier. A couple of days ago, it came up that you could use the effects from Zoom to put a lower third in, or they could. There's no easy way to do it on the far end unless you're using something like Zoom ISO to pull it out and then add graphics to it. There are some Zoom effects, and one of them, I think someone figured out how to hack one of those into a lower third, but that will require your people on the far end to know what they're doing, or for you to do a screen share to kind of get it set up. And I've never actually done that. So that's the only challenge there. I think that kind of thing is probably in Zoom's future. I think they're going to move really fast towards building events, more and more turnkey. But I think that right now it's a little bit difficult without taking people out of the Zoom and running them through a process. Next question.
Sky Gleason in the panel says, from Seattle, Washington, question for the community. How best can we promote next Saturday's March 19th at 8 a.m. the Office Hours Space.com event?
Go ahead, Tony.
First thing I'm going to say is John and I had a fantastic conversation with Tony Mobley. Ask people to share that conversation. And then the other thing I would suggest is continue to bombard social media with the fact that this is happening.
Go ahead, Sky.
Well, the bombarding part is, all things are possible with time and money, but we have resources here, and Tex and Dennis and various other people in the community have started making some short versions of your conversations, Tony. So I'm wondering, do we share and point back to the YouTube space? Do we say, just here's a thing? I guess I've always been a part of the machine for major broadcast and major networks, but the building of that path is something I'm wanting to learn more about.
Yeah. What's the launch window right now, John?
8 a.m. the webcast is going to start. The question I think Sky's asking is, are you going to promote it? Should we promote office hours? Should we drive the traffic to office hours or the website?
I would do it to the website, but what's the exact launch? Do you know exactly when you're going to try to launch?
We're shooting for 9 a.m.
Okay, yeah. So,
but there's a whole pre-show before that with pre-roll and roll-ins, and Chris is bringing in Vienna from Australia, and we've got lots of on the ground event that's happening.
No, I just want to know how much earlier. Here's the problem: is when you tweet something out and you do the PR, you got to figure out, if the show is super tight, then it's worth sending out right at 8 o'clock. If you feel like the show is not going to be as tight, I mean, it sounds like you guys have put a lot into it.
Fenwick's in charge. It's so tight.
So if it's tight, then what we want to do is put that out. And what I would recommend is doing a kind of what we tend to call a tweet storm, which is that we all get kind of organized around it. I tweet something out and everybody retweet it. Don't tweet your own thing, but everybody retweet it, because the reason that makes a difference, and if we go to the website, I'll get out to the most number of people, I think, in our group, and then if everybody retweets it, it shows up as a trend, or not necessarily a trend that shows up on the side, but it shows up to Twitter that there's heat around it, and it'll start to then, it affects the algorithm. And so the algorithm will start going, oh, there's something happening here. I'm gonna start spreading that, because of course there's your timeline, and then there's what it recommends. That algorithm is what we want to manipulate. And so I think that would be my recommendation.
Tex has also put together a really nice promo. I think you saw the vertical. We have a 16:9 of it. It would be a cool pick of the week on MacBreak Weekly.
If I'm there, I have some things. So I
could go for you.
Exactly. Yeah. So I have some things. I'm not sure.
You should let the entire panel sub for you and drive Leo crazy one week.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Next question.
Moving on, the seventh scroll in Brooklyn's back with, we're thinking about getting a slider for our Blackmagic 6K Pro. Any suggestions or links for ones to look out for? Also, would you place the main camera on a slider for a cooking show or an interview show?
Go ahead, Jason.
I have a really cheap slider, but I augment it using the Tilta adapter to the Ronin, and it is absolutely a beautiful shot that comes out of it. For a cooking show, no, I don't think a slider should be your main camera. Just
Courtney?
If you are going to get a slider with the 6K Pro, it depends on how much you're going to load that Pro up. If you're going to put a teleprompter on it, things like that, then you have to get a pretty hefty slider. Look for one that will mount on top of a tripod. There are hundreds of sliders on Amazon that are designed to sit on top of a table. They've got little legs on them, and then the slider part goes back and forth. Look for one that can mount on top of a tripod. You're going to have to, if you do get a heavy camera, if you're going to mount batteries on it and a monitor on it, a larger viewfinder monitor, et cetera, you can get up to a pretty good heavy weight and a zoom lens and a teleprompter. So get one appropriate for the amount of weight that you're going to put on it. Look at the handling weight of the slider. And usually they're 3 or 4 feet. If you get more than 4 feet, you're going to have to support it on both ends with C-stands or some other type of tripod underneath, and it becomes much more difficult to move around.
Go ahead, Bill.
I was surprised. I needed one for a shot in a video, and I wanted to get something really cheap. So I got the one from Newer and was surprised at how well engineered it was. And I don't think that's going to last for a long time. I would definitely not put that in a rental inventory for 1 second. But for accomplishing some shots, and if you're going to put it in one place and leave it there, it had a remarkable good bit of engineering. It has little geared things so that as the slider moves across, the camera can stay fixed on a position, and other things that were above the level I expected for an inexpensive product like that. So those notes.
Yeah, go ahead, Sky.
I'm going to recommend a company out of Turkey called Edelkrone, and it has a very short throw. They've got a variety of them, but they also have motors that have, again, evolved from a very loud, noisy thing to a very quiet thing. But also, you don't need a lot of throw because you're just doing a parallax between something and the background. And so if you have that off to the side, and it can just automate back and forth and constantly focus on the thing that it's supposed to be looking at, it's a pretty cool side shot for you.
Yeah, the original one that is literally called the original slider is called the original slider, and it's from a guy in LA. And these things are super beefy. They're expensive, but they are. You can stack them and make them go 30 feet if you want to. You probably don't need that. The Edelkrone one has the remote controls. There's also the Dana Dolly, which is it's just a set of trail racks that'll go on a speed rail. That's relatively inexpensive, and it gives you. The thing about the Dana Dolly is that it's got it's got great wheels, and then you can put speed rail there, and the speed rail's cheap, and so you can make it as long as you want. It's just a matter of how long you can support it, and we've used those in events. Again, if I was doing a cooking show, a jib is way more valuable in a cooking show than a dolly, and a jib in general is more valuable than a dolly because it does more than just move. It lets you have lots and lots of different shots. Even if you're not doing slow moves or anything else, I can get over here, now I can get over there, and it's a really, really valuable thing. So I would look at that. And Porta-Jib makes a really great one that we've used for a long time for a couple grand. Next question.
Sky Gleason, Seattle, Washington says, what are the Vegas odds of how many people will be watching the Office Hours Space launch on YouTube next week?
Go ahead, John.
Sky likes to throw me under the bus every day. My expectations are low. If we get a couple hundred live and then a couple thousand on demand, I'll be very happy.
Yeah, I think that's these things are hard. The main thing is that you always want to look at things as a progress. The first time you do it, it's just hard to get it off the ground. And so, a lot of it is.
Is that a rocket launch joke?
Yeah, it wasn't. I just thought about it. It just came out that way. The thing that I would think about, on that path is in the future is doing more stuff, more stuff before. We've done some stuff for us, but more events beforehand, talking about space and talking about space, talking about the process. And, I would do 5 or 6 events, over 5 or 6 weeks, that get as many people as it gets, people interested in rocketry and so on and so forth. That kind of helps build up some of the pieces there. So, I think that we'll do a graphics thing about the graphics after the show. I would have recommended doing it before the show because it helps promote the show. But and if you guys change your mind, I can move Wednesday around. But I would do it before the show instead of after the show because it helps us show it to a bunch of people.
Tuomo has gone all out.
I know. That's why. I would
really cool.
It's not doing the show. It's what that show would do is that second hour is promote the show. So anyway,
if you wanted to do it, you should probably aim at doing it. Oh, good grief! It's Friday already. Yeah. Because Tuomo was going to get on a plane, so it would have to be like Monday before he leaves his desk.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Anyway, next question.
Next one comes from Tom Ferguson in Phoenix, Arizona. And Tom says, do you prefer to use the MixEffect app on the M1 or the iPad? I'm thinking about clearing the desk by rack mounting the ATEM. Any thoughts?
Go ahead, Tom.
Well, the ATEM, of course, brings an exponential increase in the number of cables you have at your desk. And beyond that, I've had, because of the warmth of the actual keyboard, a problem with fade to black at random intervals. This seems to be a problem for me. So I was wondering if anyone could give me some help on this.
Go ahead, Peter.
Well, I do have my ATEM over on the side, but it's on top of a rack. So lots of air is flowing around it. It's got one of those funny stands that DVE store was selling a while back to hold it up off the thing and all the cables. Oddly enough, I tend to use my iPhone for MixEffect more often than I use my iPad. And that's simply because I can hold it in my hand while I'm sitting at my desk and leaning back, and I can still control the ATEM. My 12.9-inch iPad is a bit heavy to hang around leaning back in my lap with.
Yeah, go ahead, Jason.
What I really like is that I can go between the two. I totally support racking. I think it's a great idea, especially if, like me, you have more than one ATEM. And it's handy to go between the two, and they don't tend to interfere with each other. So I don't think it matters. I think you should rack it and see what works.
Yeah, I have to admit, I use MixEffect Pro for the super sources, and I always forget that it can actually do everything else too. So I think that I after you asked that question, I was like, oh, I should do that. I only hit like a handful of things on my ATEM, and I could totally do it with MixEffect Pro. So I'm going to try it. We'll get back to it. For personal use, I would use an iPad. I think we're using a Mac Mini right now for this show, for just because it's easier to kind of manage than an iPad. But I've done whole shows in front of tens of thousands of people with just MixEffect Pro, like literally just tapping the screen. In fact, getting it all set up and just tapping it. And it was mostly a super source show. So it's like, I'm going to animate over here and now I'm going to animate over there. And I've done it in front of, again, a lot of people. I only made one mistake that still drives me crazy. Hit the wrong button for a second. Next question.
Tony Mobley, Noonan, Georgia, is up next. He says, Alex, can you demonstrate the use case for the Shoot app again, please?
Yeah. So, I mean, the real, I don't know why it does this. Every time I turn it on, it wants to tell me things. Oh, I can't. Oh, wait, hold on. I had it plugged in. Let's see, here we go. There we go. So the big thing is that if I cut to this, let's see. Sorry. So if I'm cutting to something here, let's see, I'll cut to this, and I want to talk about something, I can circle while I'm talking. So if I'm streaming, I don't need a telestrator to do that. So I mean, that's the number one thing for me. And if I double tap it, it disappears. If I can circle something here, I can also tap with both fingers, and now it's frozen. My hand's in the way, and I can circle.
Your body is there?
Yeah. Yeah. There we go. I gotta get out of the way. So there we go. So anyway, but the point is that if I wanted to circle something, what's cool, thank you. I blame you. But what's cool is I can very quickly be talking about something and grabbing onto something, but then I want to actually do something. I double tap it, and now I can circle it. I can draw around this. I can talk about this going this way and that going that way, and so on and so forth. Double tap it and circle something else, and I'm just using the image. And if I want to go back, again, I can just I can just tap with both fingers. I have a tendency to tap twice with both fingers, which puts it back into the state. There we go. But now I can sit there and circle things that's live. So I don't know of any other app that does that. It's a really for if I'm teaching something, if I'm showing something, if I'm, in the physical world and I want to talk about it, I can see for teachers, you could be doing virtual, going out and talking about plants and talking about things and being able to circle things and, everything else. It's pretty powerful that they put it into there. And I have talked with almost every camera maker that makes software for the phone about a telestration. Like literally told them, hey, you should telestrate. You should be able to write on this. And they're like, oh yeah, we'll get around to it. So I'm pretty excited that someone finally actually did it. Next question.
Next one comes from Josh Kaufman in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. He says, I have the challenge of outfitting 9 panelists with home studio backgrounds with shallow depth of field. The Office Hours panel is a good source of inspiration with the variety and style we have. Does the panel have any suggestions on potential furnishing or lighting for these sets?
Go ahead, Josh.
Yeah, so they're going to have Sony cameras with APS-C or full frame, so you get the shallow depth of field. And I just, looking around just at the panel and just what we've chosen to do, I've noticed some like Chris and Blue and Courtney, you've chosen the like home furnishings, which is nice. Others like Sky and Peter and Alex, you have a flat background, some with some color added as well. But just wanted to get some idea about lighting on the talent or the color. Some of the furnishings, shelf and lights is kind of the tried and true, but I want to have a variety too. We didn't want to have everyone looking the same, but I will say that with the shallow depth of field, you do like to have something in the background to give a hint of what's back there. So maybe not the flat look, perhaps.
Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
So I think you're in the realm of lighting. If you already have the camera and the lensing situated such that you can get an open aperture and shallow depth of field, the next part of it is lighting in 2 planes. The presenter plane, which is everything directly in front of whoever's going to be speaking. That's their key fill and hopefully backlighting to separate them from the background. And then the next part of it is lighting for your background. And that's where I spent most of the time in setting this up for myself. And one of the things that I learned, if you don't want to get a really expensive fixtures to do your lighting in the background, you can use the relatively inexpensive LED lights that now are kind of all over Amazon, but you really can't dim them very easily. previously, what I was running into is the moment I took them off 100%, I would get flickering because most of them use pulse code modulation as a way to dim their lights. And depending on your camera shutter speed, that'll cause some really bad flickering effects. So rather than dimming, I would put neutral density gel on top of the color light. And that really allowed me more control over how bright my backgrounds were without getting into trouble.
Go ahead, Sky.
Well, again, Blue's got the side light coming in from the window, where again, John Pretto back there has the window coming in from behind him. So both of them look like they have enough light, though, to compensate for seeing their face, but there's lots of texture. And again, I continue to wonder, what is that thing behind Blue? And what is that skeleton behind John? And so it's that distraction of the what's that on behind Tony? Is that, what book is that? So that's the conversation. But when I did this with my small group, I put the person right in the corner with two windows she was facing the window. And so she was just beautifully lit, but way off in the background was her kitchen. So I turned on just a little couple lights way in the back just to go, oh, that's what that is back there. But I don't really want people to look at it.
Good, Chris.
You know, Alex always tells the story about the guy at Tech TV who said, be yourself plus 25%. Josh, I think nothing that is here that all of this would be in this room no matter what. It's maybe adjusted a little because it's just me plus 25. I have a sense I'm in Blue's house. I know I'm in Courtney's house. And so I think what's been most fascinating to me about doing all these remote records over the last couple of years is the fact that we get to see people's personalities. So if I was picking a background, I would try, and if it's for a specific person, I don't know, you didn't mention that, I would want to see who they are. Are they a sports person? Do they have sports memorabilia? Do they like their flag? I mean, whatever it is, I think that's the most interesting thing, is to give just a hint of who that person is, if it's relevant or if it's for a specific person.
Do they have an Emmy over their shoulder?
Go ahead, Peter.
I was just gonna say, the comment was made, either you have a real active background behind you or stuff behind you, or you end up like me, and there are a few of us. Alex is one of them, as a matter of fact, who puts a flat background. But if those of you who remember me back on office hours, the reason I do that is to cover the sins of large pieces of glass with pictures behind them. And the lighting was making very odd effects. So now it's hidden when I'm on camera.
I'm hiding a window that would be really hard to light against. That's the reason it's there. Go ahead, Courtney.
I have a problem with hiding the windows because they're floor to ceiling, and there's two of them on either side of the door. The one thing you do need to consider is controlling the lighting in the room if you want to add color. Because as you can see, I have color behind me before the show starts, but once the sun comes blasting through the window, it pretty much washes out a lot of the color. And you want to try and work on a little bit longer into the lens, which may make it difficult if the person is by themselves, because once that camera is out of arm's reach, then it's very difficult to make small adjustments to the camera unless you have a remote head and remote control over the focus and the lens size, the zoom on the camera. So you want to either have a camera you can focus, if autofocuses itself, and hopefully you have a remote on the zoom, then you can adjust your framing easily without having to get up, change it, go back, sit down, go, oh, I'm too tall, go back, change it, etc. And stay away. I don't like ring lights if you wear glasses. So if a person wears glasses, don't put the ring light anywhere near the lens. You can put it up above the lens so it doesn't reflect. But nothing drives me crazier than seeing that little ring around their eyes and glasses from a ring light.
Yeah, I think for the average person, the lights can't get big enough. Like, I've literally done lights, even for models, where the light is 6 feet high. And they look amazing. So when you think about lighting, I think that's the one thing I would definitely think about is large sources. My source here is about 3 feet wide and 2 feet high. It's a pretty large set of sources there to make that work. And I need it. so anyway, so definitely think about that, how you're lighting. I think a lot of the kits that people send out, I send out pretty big lights. I send out two 68Bs, that are not massive, not as big as the 100s that I'm using here, but are big, because I did send out 200 Bs for one show, and that's too big for the average person. If you're sending it to them, the kit, the box is big. So big light, a big source light. I really like cool colors like yours, like a lot of us here. You'll see that very common in broadcast because it complements the skin color and it doesn't compete with it. So I do like cool colors behind it. I do like windows when it works. So like I think Blue's frame is a great example of it. Alex Goldner does it as well. It looks great, and I think, it's a good look when it works, and when it doesn't, it's not a good look. It overexposes one side of the face, but when it does work in Courtney's, I think Courtney's for the most part works, and then there's just parts of the day where it gets a little too bright. But I think that natural light is good. I tend to get rid of the natural light first because I don't want to try to figure it out. One thing I am interested in before we jump to the next thing is really looking at Middle Things came out with that little controller that you can control the camera. You can control it. You can control a Ronin RS2 with this hardware controller that's like a pan tilt zoom head. And suddenly I realized that if that Middle Things can do it, it means there's a protocol, and if that protocol is there, we can control it over the internet using something, So I'm probably going to get one of those RS2s. They're only about $1,000 for a remote head. That's a pretty good number. And but I think I also think that'd be great for me to put it, for us or me to put it up so that I can sit there with a little. I would then have a little controller that I can zoom in and move around if I wanted to change my frame during a show. It'd be pretty great because that's, as Courtney mentioned, one of the hardest things once the camera gets a little further away. Next question.
Next one comes from Eric Price in Kansas City. And Eric says, I noted today that the daily email still says the Mukana link will be provided in the Zoom chat. How will this be managed after Zoom is no longer the producer's access point? And he had a brief panic this morning when Safari had no pins or history.
I'm glad you asked this question because I didn't think of that. So I didn't think that far out. So we will ponder it and we'll have a solution by Monday. So we'll still have this running a little bit longer and it's mostly my fault. We were setting up a stage this week and I didn't. I got a little behind. So anyway, we'll find a solution. But I'm glad you brought it up because it'll give you a moment to think. All right, next question.
Todd Raines in Allen, Texas comes up next. He says, in large convention centers, it's easy to tether a stream from your mobile device. Or is it easier to do that? Or is it better to use the in-house Wi-Fi? If you have a booth, can you ask and get a hard line for internet connection?
Go ahead, Courtney.
You can get a hard line. It depends is the answer. It depends on the convention center. It depends on if it's big enough. A lot of the phone companies will put their own LTE transmitters and relays inside the convention center to increase the traffic. If it's a very crowded convention, you're going to be competing with everybody else on the floor that's going to be wanting to stream back stuff to somebody else. So there's a limited amount of bandwidth. A dedicated line is the best. You will pay through the nose from the convention center for that connectivity. It is very expensive, but it's one of the ways you have a, guaranteed uplink speed, but it won't be as good as they say it will be.
Yeah, go ahead, Jason.
The only thing harder than streaming through a phone is using in-house Wi-Fi anywhere to do anything at any time, especially any sort of trade show. Avoid it at all costs. I would just capture audio and assemble a shot real quick afterwards. Streaming is not that critical.
Well, it is for Todd because that's what Todd does. So, Bill?
Everything has been said so far on steroids. I've never had a good experience. And no matter how much you test in advance, when all those bodies gets there and 100,000 devices are trying to hit their Wi-Fi, it just all falls to pieces. And it's very, very difficult to do anything. And yes, we have paid for a direct line into a suite there. And it was the cost of a military for a small nation. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, you should brace yourself for if you really want it to work, you should think of a budget of about $4,000 to $6,000. Like that's what it's going to cost for a hard line. That's what it's going to cost for a live view with an extender. If you decide to to go wireless, your phone will probably not work under any circumstances. You will not be able to tether very well. It depends on how many people are there. So if you have a conference and this is 2,000 people, it might work depending on where the cell towers are. If it's more than 2,000 people, because I don't know what kind of conference Todd's going to and how many people are at the convention center. But generally, the convention center does not spend a lot of time making this better because they want to sell you hard lines. So it's a lot more profitable for them. So there's usually not. There's a handful of convention centers that are exceptional. So McCormick Center in Chicago has excellent internet. Moscone has pretty good internet. That's about it. so anyway, LACC does a pretty good job as well. Anyway, next question.
Todd Raines, again from Allen, Texas. Has anybody tested or used the Roland VRC-01 Aerocaster device? What are your thoughts on using something like this for a trade show floor streaming?
The Aerocaster, is this a streaming? So the answer is no. No one's used it. so like no one's used the Aerocaster. We've talked about it. I think this is the one with Roland that's kind of all built in. It's got audio mixer. It's got a switcher. It looks like a really interesting little box, and I think that John Idelson, I think, is looking at using it for some of the stuff that he's doing. So maybe we'll have to try to find John to find out if he's actually tested one yet. It's a really nice little box. I still would probably, I'm all kind of Blackmagic pipeline, so my filter is all how do I use Blackmagic hardware to do that. But I think it's a cool little. It looks like Roland has really found the niche of all-in-one, all the connectors you need, because I think it has XLR ins, which makes it a lot nicer. It just doesn't have a lot of flourishes, but I think that it's something that we'd like to test. Next question.
Seven Scroll in Brooklyn and back. With using an iPad or a Wacom tablet as telestrators on the ATEM, what are the apps you use on these two devices for each to work best?
So if you're using a Wacom tablet, what I use is just Keynote. So I literally take, if I'm going to telestrate with it, I'm going to have Keynote and I build like 40 white slides, and then I have a black pen, and then I just key it, out. You can do a couple different ways of doing that if you, but that's how I do it with and I don't have it quite set up right now to do that. And then for the one that I'm using, a Wacom tablet means that this is what I use, and it's the advantage of the Wacom tablet is that I can see what I'm drawing on. I'm using the Wacom one. It's like $300 or $400, and I can see what I'm drawing on, and it makes to me, it's like night and day. So I only use the iPad if something breaks. But the Wacom tablet, now I'm using a Mac Mini. So it's a Mac Mini and a Wacom tablet. And that's really that, and the ATEM is all you need to make it happen. So next question.
Next one comes from Steve Bauer in Seattle, and he says the PBS NewsHour is streamed on YouTube Live at 3 p.m. Pacific time daily. Strangely, I can pause, and if enough of it is buffered up, I can even rewind and fast forward. This is very unusual for a live stream on YouTube. Does anybody know how they do this?
I'll go ahead, Blue.
Yeah, it's actually just a setting inside the stream settings. Anybody can do it. It's I believe it's enable DVR.
Yep.
From within your stream settings, and you can turn it on or turn it off.
And I thought enable DVR was on by default, but maybe they've turned that off.
I don't stream enough on YouTube to know that, but I know it's just a simple toggle when you're setting up your stream.
Yeah, it's a setting. It's definitely a setting. It used to be something that it did unless you told it not to. But they may have changed that behavior. Next question.
Next one comes from Todd Raines in Allen, Texas. Todd says, what recommendations do you have for vlogging at a trade show? A small, inexpensive solution for single camera and or perhaps a 2-camera switching setup.
Go ahead, Jason.
Again, I'm going to pretend that you're not streaming live on the floor and you're just, how do you get the shots and then vlog about them later? My answer is for the interviews, I've had great luck just simply pointing a camera directly at the person. And even if I'm not using the microphone, using it purely to not talk over the person tends to be useful. After that, I will get B-roll of whatever it is in the order that we talk about it. And then usually it's just, quick setup and then just a lot of cutting.
Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
I would use Meerkat. Meerkat's fun. No, I mean, Meerkat was
around. It was fun though. It was good.
I wanted to say it because you had mentioned the other day. Yeah. I really enjoyed Meerkat also.
Yeah, it was great.
I miss it.
What happened? It became House Party, then it got bought by somebody. Go ahead, Courtney.
I would use the now I can't think of the name of the DJI, the little hand. Right. What's it called? Anyone?
Yeah.
None of us can remember the name. I have one of those and mount it side by side because it has a wide angle lens and it has a stabilizer in it. And so it'll always keep the image stabilized, and you can shoot tights with the camera. So you mount a DSLR type video capture device and one of the DJI little gimbals.
By the end, that's all I was using.
Right. And then you can get a wide shot and a tight shot at the same time, and it's motion stabilized. And
so I've done a lot of coverage of conferences, NAB and CES, and I have now just used my phone. like I literally just use the phone. I can zoom in, I can zoom out. And what I do is if I'm going to edit it later, like if you're going to do it live, that's a whole nother problem that I'm not certain whether you're trying to do it live or not. But if you are, then I would still use HDMI cameras and an ATEM switcher. I mean, that's what I would do for that. And I'd try to enlist some of us to help you with it so that we could control it from a remote if you had a good, so that you don't have more to do than you have to. But if you're covering the show, I go booth to booth to booth to booth to booth, and I've had EX1s, a bunch of other cameras. I've had a small crew. I've had a large crew. I've had all kinds of crews. I've had a stage, and the way that I find now that I prefer to do it is get a good mic that's going to have good off, some kind of Bluetooth mic. I use the Boom because it cuts out most of the stuff around it, and it's a little thin, but it otherwise does a great job. And I just get really good at. You'd be surprised that when you get good at it, you kind of go in, go out, move around, and if you didn't get something, you go back and shoot some close-ups of it. You just say what you're going to say. And what I do when I'm covering these things if you go back and look at some of the older stuff on the Alex Lindsay YouTube channel or whatever, you'll see some of the stuff that I've done, and you'll see different versions of it, I think, but over the last 10 years. And you'd be surprised that once you start getting good at moving around, you can do a lot with a single camera. And what I do is I'll interview someone. I don't want them to talk. People are not very good at talking about their own products at conferences. That's been my experience. They can't get to the point. They don't really understand the thread. They don't understand why their product's important. And so I just walk up and I ask them for raw information. I just go, what's this? What's this? How much does this cost? How much is this? And I think about it for a second, and then I just do it. Like I just do one stream of consciousness out, and I just keep it in short-term memory. Say everything I'm going to say, I move on to the next one. And it's just been a lot easier. And because interviewing people, unless they're really the technician and there's something you want to get and it's going to be a longer interview, they just blah, 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 blah. And none of it makes any difference. It's not a good show. so I know that's their job, but it's not, they don't know how to do sound bites. Like that, they're good at talking to you about their product over a half an hour or 15 minutes, but they don't know how to condense everything that's important about their product into 90 seconds. And that's what you want to get good at to cover these, in my opinion. And I think you'd be perfect at it to do it because you understand the product lines, you understand, broadcast, and I think that it's a great thing. But you can look at some of my older stuff and see it. And if you decided you don't like it, then I'm full of it, then then do something else. But if you like what you're seeing there, that's just me just absorbing it and spitting it back out again. Next question.
Jack Cannon in Phoenix, Arizona says, with all the value of that MixEffect Pro brings, would it make sense to ask Adam Toe to come back and do another second hour just highlighting all of its many options?
I think it would be good. I also think that, I think John Barker came out with some new stuff and we want to bring him back on to talk about that. It would be good to bring Adam Toe on because Adam Toe is now at Zoom. I'm not sure he's allowed to come back on to a broadcast. So I think that, I don't know if, once you move into a large broadcast, a large corporation, there's people who are, public facing and people who are not public facing. And, it's just from a lawyer perspective. So Jason.
Can I just say, Dennis, that graphic is awesome.
Next question.
Whoops, hit the wrong button. Tony Mobley, Noonan, Georgia says, how do we get average people to want to do better than just enough on their personal streaming?
Chris?
Tony, I think the answer to your question is in the question. they are average people. And I think that there are people that are going to be average, and they don't understand. I will tell you, I was on a tech call yesterday with a dozen people that we were going to record in the next couple of weeks. And I put my framer up and I sat there, and then I took the speaker view, and I was like a third level person in the meeting. I took the speaker view and I put the framer up, and I started pinning people. And all of a sudden they were like, oh, look at me. Huh. I should be. Oh. Yeah. And then it was really just a meeting to teach people how to use Zoom, but it was very interesting. So that's one thing you can do. But when it comes to a lot of this stuff, they just don't understand. And I don't, and unless there's a mandate or the guilting that Alex likes to do, well, everybody else is going to look good. So exactly. Do you want to look like a schlub?
It's very effective.
Awesome. So, but they're average people.
Yeah, go ahead, Sky.
Well, Tony, you are average. I am average. But we've known each other now. We've been in a relationship for 2 years. But we are not the same technologically that we were 2 years ago, because we wanted to stay in relationship. We wanted to connect. So there is a value in getting to know one another, and the technology is the conduit. Yeah. So how do you look, is to Chris's point, isn't it as an influence to others? But again, what is the value for them in wanting to be better in this communication of relationship?
Yeah, Bill?
My opinion is that most everybody can elevate their game at least a bit. And so it has to become important to them. If it's not, they will ignore it. But if it's important to them, so your job as somebody trying to get them to be better on camera, on screen, or whatever, is to find the way to make it important enough for them so that they have the motivation to elevate themselves. And then they will be better, and they will feel better about that.
Go ahead, Peter.
Well, I have to say, I often subscribe to your approach, Alex, which is I refer to as management by embarrassment. But I've also used Chris's technique, because I have a copy of Chris's framer, and I've used exactly what you just said, and watch people. And now I deal mostly with 14 to 18, 19-year-olds. And the really funny ones to watch, I hate to say this, are the young women. Because all of a sudden they will see that framer, and not only do they do exactly what you did to Chris. They all of a sudden they sit up. They're much more aware of, I hate to say this, of their hair. The guys are often slumping, and all of a sudden they'll sit up. But it is management by embarrassment in its core.
Yeah, I mean, the thing to figure out how to use is refer to Sturgeon's law. Sturgeon's law is that 90% of everything is not very good, is crude. I think that Mark Andreessen said something else, but it was a little rougher. But 90% of everything is crude. Everything, every product, every person in every profession is 90% aren't very good at what they do. And the question is, do you want to be in the 90 or do you want to be in the 10? And so I don't say it that way when I'm saying it that way, but I just kind of mention, we try to really, we subscribe to the Sturgeon's law, and we, I'll just say something like that, and people will go Google it, they'll figure it out. And for everybody, it's I spend most of my life trying to be in that 10% of almost everything that I do. That's how I play. And sometimes I try to be in the top 1% for things that I really care about. So, but I think that it's a pretty accurate assumption. And so when you're looking at it, you just have to understand that 90% of the people that you interact with are not going to put the effort into doing it. I think that it's so much easier than buying clothes and nice cars to look nice. Like, I only have to iron the shirt to here. It's awesome. It's so much better. Like, I hate interacting with people in real life because I have to actually figure out what I'm going to wear, and I have to get in a car, and I have to and it's so easy to look good and be more influential, because you are more influential when you look better. Like, in all parts of life. Turns out that Zoom is the easiest one to look better. Next question.
Alex,
George,
I'm sorry, if I could real quick. I don't know. I can't remember who made this, but I don't know if you've seen this. Look at this. Isn't this cool? Somebody made this for me. Go frame yourself.
Yeah, that's so awesome. that's such a great. I remember them doing. I know they should have signed it with a longer name. Next question.
George Butters, Halifax, Nova Scotia, says, "Is there a way to nest folders in Apple Notes?"
Go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, there is. You basically just take a folder and drag it into another folder, and that'll nest it. But just a quick note, I found that I can convert folders into smart folders based on tags. And if you can teach yourself to start using tags, that becomes a lot more useful.
Next question. And by the way, the other than Keynote Notes is the thing I use the most. I did a thing where I looked at how much my processor. I live in that program. Every meeting, I just open it up and put a title that I'll be able to search for, and then start taking notes in Notes, and it's super useful. I can hear you, Chris, playing with your Rubik's Cube. Next question.
Joel in Mumbai, India, is up next. What is better in the long run for a house of worship, Vimeo-Live or a custom setup on AWS Elemental Live?
You will have. It's easier to set up on Vimeo-Live. Depending on how many times you stream, it may actually be more expensive on Vimeo-Live than AWS. So once you buy, now there's, because you're paying per minute or per hour. It's like, and if you're doing 1080p regular stereo to YouTube or something like that, you'll pay $1.50, I think $1.50 an hour or something like that for it. So it's not a horrible number. And Vimeo has to stream has costs to it as well. So if you're going to that, the advantage of Vimeo-Live is that you have a player, you have control of access, you have a bunch of stuff built into it. So you have to decide if you're trying to do those things. With Elemental Live, you're going to end up rolling your own everything. And so if you think you can do that, that's great. But if it is going to be more technical work, you will also have way more flexibility in AWS than you do with Vimeo. So Vimeo is going to be fast to start and hard to customize as much. AWS is going to be slower to start, and it's going to be, you can keep on customizing it. And so you can kind of grow into all the things that you might want to do. So it's kind of, it depends. In the long run, if you have someone technical that can help you, I would use AWS but if you want something to be working in the next couple of weeks and you haven't done a lot of AWS work, I would do Vimeo. So, and they have a lot of great tools. I mean, they have an OTT solution, which they'll build an app for you that will go on Apple TV or Roku or both. They have all kinds of access controls. It's a good platform. So next question.
Next question comes from George Butters in Halifax, Nova Scotia. What's the longest running hardware or software still in daily use in your workflow?
Go ahead, Courtney.
Well, it's not a piece of software, but it is a piece of hardware. I have a console, which I can't show you right now because it's in front of me, that I built when I wrote my original software for the Atari back in 1982. And it's now holding all the computers. It's a rolling cart and then a plywood built console that holds the monitor and the keyboard in front of me. And now there's a printer on top of it. Now there's lights attached to it, and there's outboard screens hanging off the right side. And there's an outboard piece of plywood off the right that has my mouse pad on it. And there's an outboard piece over here that has another thing attached to it, has a tablet attached to it, and it's just grown and grown and grown. Mm-hmm. And I've been writing and sitting in this corner writing software and participating in Zoom meetings. Well, not Zoom meetings, but writing software, sitting here for over 40 years.
Go ahead, Jason.
About 15 years ago or so, at an early NAB, I met Bob Heil, and prior to that, all of my studio work was, Electro Voice, RE20s, RE27s. Loved his charisma and immediately bought several PR40s and have used them ever since.
Yeah, Bill, real quick.
Grip gear, beyond a shadow of a doubt. The oldest thing in this room right now is the C-stand that's holding my key light above my monitor. I've had it for probably 35 years, and it works exactly as well as the day I bought it.
There you go. Next question.
Next question, George Butters in Halifax, Nova Scotia. How do you explain the huge rise, then dramatic fall of Zoom's stock value in the past year?
Josh?
Well, I'll only comment slightly about the perceived value of stocks versus the actual value of them. I think it was Buffett that says that the stocks are a popularity contest on the short term and a scale on the long term. But Zoom took off at the beginning of the pandemic because it was this thing that took this addressable market. So their value became apparent when everyone saw, look, they're doing this better than everyone else. This is something that's really needed. So, their stock price went up. But over the long term, there's a lot of analytics as to, okay, you've captured the market, but what are your overhead costs? Are you going to be able to capitalize on that? What other products are you putting out to be able to do that, to be able to get more monetary funds in that affect the stock price? So a lot of that is above my pay grade, but that's my 2 cents on.
John, real quick.
Their PE was totally out of hand, and so just look at their PE value. Their last earnings report was fabulous, so they're all good.
Good, Courtney. Real quick.
The quick explanation is the pandemic. Of course, people started working from home and they realized they could go to meetings and stuff on this free application that lets them join. And unless they're required to use Teams or some other streaming platform, it was easy and available.
Yeah, I mean, stock traders don't really understand their product. I mean, don't understand everything that they're investing in. They're looking for a trend. They don't really know what they're talking about, and they make they make superficial decisions. Like that tends to be the issue. And so they superficially go, oh my gosh, this is the future, and then they go, oh, it's not the future, and they jump in and out of it. I think Zoom is going to continue to grow, and I don't think the stock price really matters to them. Because they're profitable. So anyway. We are now changing subjects to our second hour, and we have Bill McLaughlin here from Brooklyn. He is from AI Media. Hi, Bill.
Hi, how are you doing, Alex? Great to be here.
It's good to have you here, and so we are going to be talking about captions. So you can start stacking up questions for Bill. AI Media now is the de facto leader in captions in the world with the purchase of EEG, and tell us a little bit, Bill, about the background of both EEG and AI Media.
Yeah, so what we've really done with EEG and AI Media is kind of unified what was the two sides of the live captioning business largely, which have been, moving together through automation and, through becoming obviously, like anything in video, more and more of a software play. AI Media comes out of Australia. Traditionally has been very involved in the services side of the business. So actually providing transcription, translation, interpretation services.
And is some of that driven from the legal requirements in Australia that really there was so many languages and so much that was required to be captioned? Is that right?
Yeah, and in broadcasting, I would say, the regulations in Australia are probably among the most stringent in the world in terms of, the uptime of the captioning service, the accuracy quality of the caption service. I mean, America has had almost a total captioning requirement on broadcast cable satellite delivery since about 1995. But I think at this point, some other countries really have a more stringent requirement in terms of the quality of that service and, the amount that the regulators are really investigating even, very small outages. So I think Australia has become a bit of a pressure cauldron there for producing a really, really high uptime quality service.
Yeah, and you come from the EEG side, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And so I've been with EEG since 2008 and developing a lot of products in there as, that's moved from a business that since the 1980s was actually making, talk about the oldest box in the room, but the oldest box in some of our rooms is kind of a double rack unit, LED lit monstrosity of a closed captioning coder, and that was what was used in the early broadcasts on PBS, ABC, and CBS, kind of starting from the mid 1980s for broadcast captioning. And, of course, over time, this got used in a lot more broadcasts. The mandates were extended to cable, and increasingly we do live events, enterprise events. And, of course, over time too, like everything in the industry, it's moved to become a virtualized product. You can get it on a VM. You can use it as a service in the cloud. You can run it on an RTMP stream or a transport stream. You can run it in AWS. But it's really an outgrowth of that basic technology need to, how do I get captions in this video signal and, essentially pass them on to a viewer who then has that option in the closed caption window, turn this on, turn this off, change the language. And, that's kind of what's unique about closed captioning compared to, kind of just doing a burn in of the text on the screen, which is, of course, the option that a lot of times would be considered otherwise.
Yeah, and what's interesting about the merger is that the AI media, when you just need to do it in the cloud, is something that we've used in the past, and then there's a lot of things we're still using EEG 492s for because they can be on-prem, they can be private, so we don't have to have somebody outside. It doesn't have to go out into the cloud, where some of the companies we work with are pretty security conscious, and so those happen to be another piece of that, and that's inserting that in just inserting into the raw SDI feed, and so I think it's a really interesting mix. Now there's a couple ways of doing captioning, right? And I think AI media now kind of covers all of those, right? There's there's stenographer is the old the tried and true way.
A court reporter, essentially, right? Is where most people have seen that outside of the captioning space.
Absolutely, and then there is respeaking. Are you familiar? Can you describe a little bit about how respeaking works?
Yeah, so respeaking, I think, is an interesting. It's still it's a technology that's used a lot of places, but respeaking is an interesting. I think of it long term as a transitional technology as we move to more speaker independent automatic captioning, right, where the whole thing is done by you. Put your audio track or tracks into computer software, and you're going to get a perfect, beautiful transcription. Respeaking is sort of a transition along that path where rather than putting your original program through the computer software, there's essentially a transcriber like the court reporter, a respeaker, or voice writer. And that person is going to take what's being said on the program and is going to re-say it into speech recognition software that's trained specifically for that person's voice.
Right. So you have clean mic, you have a clean, an area that isn't echoing, doesn't have music, doesn't have anything else, with a system that's trained for it. Clean
professional speaker, and they're also able to do some of the things that the computer software still struggles with, where they're able to, they'll eliminate disfluencies so you don't have and problems. They'll describe a sound effect that's prominent, that impacts the meaning. They'll add punctuation that's important to the understanding verbally, since of course punctuation is fundamentally kind of a written phenomena, not really a true verbal phenomenon, but they'll add that to conventions. And basically they'll paraphrase if the discussion, if there's crosstalk and the discussion becomes hard to follow temporarily. So, the respeaker is kind of an editor in addition to a speaker or a performer.
And a stenographer is that way as well. I mean, they kind of do many of those things as well. It's just they're not speaking it. And I think that is the advantage really that the respeaker is you can train them faster than stenographers.
Absolutely. I mean, yeah, I think, the respeakers are, they're a lot more like normal people who have gone through a training program, where honestly the stenographers or the court reporters have typically been to a court reporting school. And this is kind of a collegiate style vocational program. I mean, people will do this for 2 to 3 years, with a relatively high dropout rate. So it's a great career. It's a field where it's not all automated yet, and honestly, there's a shortage of people who are skilled stenographers or court reporters, and but it does take a lot of practice.
But you think that AI eventually will take over? I mean, it'll eventually be the primary thing.
Well, eventually is a really long time. I mean, I do think we're moving, we're seeing a shift towards AI in the business overall that's moving pretty quickly. And I think that the question of when AI is going to achieve full feature parity, that's a complicated crystal ball question. I think we've seen big advances in the past 5 years. If we saw that level of advances again in another 5 years, I think we would be very close to a, feature parity Turing test kind of discussion on that. I think that, in the very long term, how could it not? But of course, when we talk about these things, a human editor, which essentially, as you said, the stenographer, the re-speaker uses some discretion and some judgment. And that's where it gets really interesting, not just the accuracy of the transcription, but that editorial function.
Yeah. And for us, I know that when we want to provide captions and we don't have a budget for it, like the clients aren't ready to pay for it, but they do kind of want it. And they want to have something there for folks. That's oftentimes where we use AI to do that. When we just let a machine do the thing. When it matters, we have stenographers. Like we hire stenographers.
That's what we see in our business mix. Our business mix has been skewing really dramatically towards AI-based captioning in our Lexi product. But in some ways that can be misleading if you interpret it as everyone who uses human captions is now switching to AI. I think that's not so much what we're seeing. What we're actually seeing is a growth in new business, with a lot of that new business being frankly lower end business, which is going to go to the AI for budget reasons as long as it's good enough. And that's exciting. There's a lot more accessible content out there, but
with all the AI, we find it harder now to find a stenographer-based captioner than ever, than we've ever had. Like every year, it's harder to find people because of as AI and re-speaking and everything else picks up. There's not a lot of new people entering the market because they just don't know how long it'll be there. But so that you have the ones that are there, and we have a hard time, having them keep up. Now, what are the main?
There's a perception this isn't a growth field, but again, yes, we have trouble staffing all of the events that we get asked to staff. It is an opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a good paying opportunity. I don't know what, I know what we pay the services to do it. It's a lot of money. So someone's
I mean, especially for, the highest quality stenographers who have a relationship with the client, and, especially something honestly where if you need technical or medical or college level course familiarity with special vocabularies, it's very lucrative.
Yeah. Well, and and that's a big challenge, right? That's one of the things that having somebody, one of the things we do is make sure that we bring our captioner, bring them in for rehearsals so that they're able to see, they're able to watch what's being said, because it's not just that they have to be able to, they have to know the words. They have to program they have to program the chords, I guess they call them, the chords so that they can say that word easily during the presentation. So you'll see them kind of figure out how they're going to put it out there, because there's shorthand where they're just hitting a chord that puts out a word, and otherwise they have to spell it, and which is,
That's right. I mean, we all know we can't type on our regular keyboard at 250 words per minute or something. So exactly, it's that they have to program in an unfamiliar term in a way that allows them to work at that speed. They can, if you just have one word that's unfamiliar, you can get away with spelling it out, but you can't be doing that continuously.
Right. What are the biggest challenges for AI right now as far as being more effective?
I think those editorial issues are difficult for the speech recognition systems to kind of to deal with to
say what you meant, not what you said. To say what you meant, not what you said.
Yeah, and especially when there's multiple speakers, and especially in a more unruly environment. When speakers are very well regimented and well rehearsed, you're in a very good place. If you have your cable news show that's like based on the entertainment of people shouting at each other, you can have trouble in those spaces that are full of kind of crosstalk and interruptions and emotional exclamations. Something like sports content, especially live game coverage as opposed to commentary, but live game coverage is something that's a bigger challenge than typical programs because, what do sportscasters do anyway? I mean, they just kind of observe things in scattered half sentences. They speak primarily in numbers. It's not a well-formed sentence by most grammar rules, and that's the kind of thing that can be a challenge too.
And what do you think is really driving the what feels like an exponential demand for captioning?
Well, I think people have really gotten used to, in a lot of markets and environments, seeing it everywhere. And that's been kind of a generational change where you go from not having this service to maybe in the late 90s in a lot of places, having it be mandated on professional TV, to going to a place where, now there's kind of, you're kind of expecting to see that. Like, it's big for engagement in content that's like, for example, on Facebook or something like that, where the audio is muted by default and you can see the captions. So I think there's kind of been an increasing expectation that content has captions. And so as a content producer, it's become one of these things that also can kind of set the mark between this is a professional production and, this is kind of just user generated content.
Yeah, I think that when what we saw as the like the hockey stick right there, or actually right, if you look at this, right about here is when Facebook added captions automatically before audio. So it would play you captions over the video in the timeline without audio, so people could decide what was in it and make a decision about it. And suddenly all of our clients had to have it because people would just go by you on the timeline if you would go by you on the timeline if they couldn't read the captions. And so, and suddenly it was just like everybody had to have them on every show across everything. And once it was done in Facebook, it was just like this chain reaction everywhere else. Do you find that some platforms handle captions better than others?
Oh, yes.
Do you have any opinions about which one? I have opinions, but I was just curious what your opinion is. If there's, are there certain social platforms that do it better than others?
Yeah, I mean, I think one important thing to separate is the VOD or recorded from the live. And so many platforms are so much more advanced in what they can do in display for VOD content. They can do it in every language, easily. You upload a file, it's well timed, it's in every language. I think when you go into live, honestly, there are very few platforms that really support an end-to-end, like production to distribution type of chain that ends up with live captions in what I'll call a non-traditional language. And what I mean by that is, in the streaming world, there's really been a piggyback on the broadcast standards, which use, embedded captions in a format like 608 or 708, in a stream, in the H.264 data or even other formats. And there's been a piggyback of that. But the problem with that is that those standards were, those standards were made for North America. There's semi-equivalent standards made for Europe, but those standards didn't really have an answer for putting Chinese characters or, so many other languages that use a different character set. They didn't have an answer for that. I mean, the set-top boxes that these were originally designed to had no intent whatsoever to put in a character library that spanned all of the world's languages. And, now we're kind of piggybacking on those standards and realizing, honestly, a call I take every day is from someone who's just incredulous that, they're using some, very what I consider very standard leading workflow. I'm running an Elemental encoder, and I'm putting it up to Vimeo, and it's like, and you're telling me that there's literally no way to put Chinese live translations into this as captions, and the answer is pretty much no. There actually really is not.
Every time I do a show that has to go to China or to Hong Kong or something like that, someone says, well, we're going to capture it in China. We found someone that'll capture it in Chinese. And I'm always like, really? They will? Because if you find someone like that, you need to tell me. You need to tell me that who that person is, because, for 10 years, it's like Hindi and Chinese are not a language that we can do live.
And unfortunately, that's been my experience talking to, product managers at a number of the platforms, is the first response is denial. Yes, we can caption in Chinese, and you go, okay, right, but we're talking about live, we're going to ingest live caption. They go, oh, I'm sure we can do this. And it, honestly, you get back with the technical staff and you realize, oh, we can't do this.
Yeah. It's a complete, and one of the things though, I think that is forgotten, and we'll jump into questions here in just a second. So go ahead and throw those questions in. One of the things that I think that, we do lose a lot of times on these platforms is the old things that we already learned. I mean, the government spent a lot of time figuring out in organizations in the 90s how it's easy to read captions. And we see people ignore it. The only platform that I've seen that really adheres to that is YouTube. And they did a bunch of other things that didn't work first. Like I've been streaming to YouTube since day one.
You want to say that it's about the platform, but it also, it depends on the browser. It depends on if you view the event on your phone or on your browser on a lot of platforms. Yeah. And, I think, yes, you're right. Like that scrolling display for live is the easiest thing to read, but that's something that only some platforms implement that in the streaming world. A lot of them want to take the live data and treat it like a pop-on caption, where it's like one line comes up, then it disappears, then another line comes up,
which is very hard to read. Like it's
very hard to read, and if it's one line in a slide,
or it goes from the center out. I'm not going to mention what platform does that.
The center out is the worst. The center out is the worst.
So it's funny. Those of us, I've been a caption captain for some pretty big events, and so we could talk for hours on just like the weird little things that captions do, because you spend your 3 weeks on a show only paying attention, only prepping to do these live captions, and spent a lot of time looking at it. But but anyways,
broadcast engineers will say the same thing. They'll say, like you wouldn't think that we spend 50% of our time talking about captions because it's just text. We do so, but it's like, the video and the audio, that's easy. It's the caption.
Yeah. When as soon as someone says they want to add captions, I warn them that, like literally 60 to 70% of our time is going to be spent getting that to work, like getting it to work well. And one of the things that
we try to make that better, but sad, but often true.
And the last thing I'll say is one of the things we really liked about the HTTP input for YouTube was that we could increase the buffer on our Elemental and pull the captions back into time. So, thinking about them as sidecar, the problem with 608, 708 is that it stays 4 seconds behind or 6 seconds behind. But we would sit there and watch it because we're already on a 40-second buffer or 30-second buffer. We just increase it a little bit and it would pull the captions so that they're appearing at the same time as the text. So being able to separate that out was useful.
Yeah. Being able to sidecar the live captions is very cool, and is something that unfortunately the industry really hasn't standardized around a way to ingest that. So it's just very ad hoc. YouTube can support something, Zoom can support something, but it's just it's ad hoc, and a lot of platforms don't support anything like that.
Absolutely. Well, we got the questions are stacking up, so we'll go ahead and jump into them. Bill, what do we have?
First one comes from Jesse Mills in the San Francisco Bay Area. He says, would you please explain the general differences between caption file types, .srt, .vtt, .scc? EEG seems to only generate .scc files, and it would be helpful to have other common file types generated.
Yeah, so the question refers to when your live event is over and you're looking for that VOD caption file that's going to have, just the timings and the text for the whole event. And there's been a lot of formats over the years. The SCC format really is a very native low-level format showing the CEA 608 data. When you have, VTT, if you open that up, it's going to be readable to a human. It has the words, it has the timestamps. On a Dare, you can go in and edit that in your Notepad editor and do something coherent. Don't try that at home with an SCC file. I'm not sure exactly what EEG products being referred to, but if you're, for example, using our Falcon streaming product, the native initial output of the export is an SCC file, but there's actually a converter tool in the cloud platform that's on, that you can go and you can take that SCC and you can make it into an SRT, a VTT, a TTML. You can get just a plain text transcript, just for search or reference or checking. So you should be able to get what you need out of the product. But yeah, I mean, each format's just a different wonderful attempt to solve this problem.
Yeah, we were talking earlier, right before the top of the hour, about our oldest software or hardware that we have, and one of my oldest ones is Mac Caption, because I'm on a Mac and I have to convert from all these different formats, and I still have an old computer that hasn't been updated just because Mac Captions can't run. It couldn't run until recently, past up to Catalina. So we have these very old machine that just sits there, and all it has to do is convert captions. So next question.
Joel is up next in Mumbai, India, and Joel says, do you support live translations? Do you? For example, speaker audio would be in English, but the caption in Hindi.
Yeah, we will do that through products like the EEG Lexi and Falcon product. And, the way to think about that is that, honestly, we do it in two stages. And so there's a audio to text stage, which can be human or automatic, all the options we talked about, transcriber that's a human, or the Lexi system. And then there's a translation step, which is even more commonly done automatically with a machine translation solution. And what you then wind up with is you wind up with two tracks of live captions. One's in the original language and one's in the translated language. And most well-known platforms are pretty good at supporting multiple languages of captioning in a stream. Sometimes that's a challenge. Of course, if you're talking about Hindi, the character set issues, again, can be an interoperability challenge. It's not insurmountable, but you kind of have to look at your production diagram and think each step along the way. How are these captions passing through? Are they being converted? Do I have a way to, if it all says 608, 708 embedded, you're probably going to have some challenges supporting the other character sets. What we do for that problem when all else fails is the Falcon platform is actually capable of generating its own HLS manifest that has its own, VTT caption tracks that can be up to 6 languages in any character set. And if you pull our HLS stream, you'll have all of that data. So, sometimes how to make that play nice with a YouTube or a Vimeo can be its own complicated question. But if you need the data, that's where you can find it.
Can it stream a specific language via HTTP to YouTube? The HTTP ingest? Yes.
Yeah, you'd be able, right.
And can it just do one language that way? Could you route it so you say, I'm going to give you an English event, and I want you to send English to this HTTP output and Hindi to this HTTP output?
I believe in YouTube, I believe they only support a single language of the HTTP output per stream, right. But from the EEG system, you could choose to make that a translated language. So if you had, for example, multiple YouTube streams,
that's what I was thinking.
Translated languages to different YouTube streams.
That's what I was thinking, is that you could theoretically have it go, you could give it 2 different HTTP outputs that are going to 2 different YouTube events, one being in Hindi and the other one being in, and again, this gets back into if you can have any number of HLS, streams, you just have to define them in the manifest to say, I have these streams and this is the order that they're coming in. And then you can put as many as you want, there. So,
yeah. And you'll have kind of your optimal experience a lot of times is, I want this, kind of in a platform with all my social integrations, all my other integrations. I want all the languages of closed captioning on that single stream. I want them user selectable without leaving the page. And that's the dream. And a lot of times when you find trouble with that, you wind up, you see a lot of this type of approach where it's like, for more languages of captioning, click here, and it was sort of like a separate stream that, is kind of away from the main one, which a lot of times is not the place where you start out wishing it would work, but it kind of gives you an alternative and a solution.
Absolutely. Next question.
Jesse Mills, San Francisco Bay Area, back. Captions from EEG Falcon via the iCap network and out to Vimeo currently do not work. Does AI Media and or EEG actually work directly with all of the destination platforms listed in the EEG Falcon?
Well, we do work with Vimeo. So honestly, this kind of sounds like a little bit of a support or setup issue, because we definitely do have customers that use the system with Vimeo. I know that historically there have been some questions about different tiers of Vimeo accounts, and sort of I believe that, I'm not an expert on every aspect of Vimeo's offering, but I believe they have kind of like premium and basic and enterprise sort of tiers. And I believe that only some of those tiers enable essentially a service like Falcon to be sending a separated RTMP stream. So yeah, there could be some account issues that, I would definitely encourage you to reach out to the EEG support kind of about what sort of issues you've been having there, because that is intended to be a supported workflow.
Next question.
Jesse Mills again from San Francisco. Is there any planned integration of the iCap EEG network into Zoom? Currently, iCap captioners need to use additional software from StreamText, for example, to send captions into Zoom.
You can actually do that with the HTTP version of the Falcon software, which is available to, it's a separate box on our EEG Cloud website, but is available to anyone who has a Falcon subscription. And that's basically what Alex is talking about, where there's a separate HTTP path for the captions. And you can use that with YouTube and Zoom are the two most prominent platforms where that's used. So you get that ingest URL from Zoom for external captions, and you put that into the HTTP window for Falcon, and you can get the captions up there that way.
Yeah, and we also for Zoom we have the captioners when we're just talking about general captions and not necessarily EEG products, we have their Eclipse just point towards it. So the Eclipse can have two outputs. ProCap and Eclipse both will do two outputs and so oftentimes we send one to the EEG that's there, and then we can focus the other one on either a cart solution that's in the room, or we can have it focus on, and we use StreamText a lot of times for the cart solution. So it might go out to that. And then the other thing though is that they can focus that, they can lock that in directly into Zoom as well. And that is the handoff that Zoom has for some of those with a token. Without the token, there's another way to hand it off, and it's clunky, or it has been clunky. It's much smoother to have the captioner tie directly in. Next question.
Agreed.
Craig?
Yeah, that's something that is a little bit like, that's often simpler to do directly from the captioner source. But for cases where someone's, for example, using the Lexi software that's automated, that's kind of why we have the integration.
And that works really well, for the automated software. Absolutely. Next question.
Craig McFarland in Boston, USA comes up with the next one. Where do you see the price points going for AI-based transcriptions?
Yeah, I think it's there's definitely been, I think there's two trends when you see the pricing for the live services. And in a way, one trend is related to the status quo and the labor shortage of the skilled human transcribers like Alex was referring to. And in that sense, that can almost be, it's hard to source someone, especially for an ad hoc event. We have to pay very high prices to get someone to do an event on short notice. On the other hand, the increasing substitutability of the AI captions for human captions, generally at a much lower cost, is kind of driving costs down. And I think a lot of times what we have right now, frankly, is often two tiers of service with a very high level of separation between them, where you might pay, $90 an hour to get a human edited service. You might pay $15 an hour or $10 an hour, depending on your volume and your service, for automatic service. So, the interesting thing is there's this very large divide there. And I mean, that divide could turn out to grow. If you imagine that the AI services keep getting better, keep getting more commoditized, and the human services keep getting scarce and are still needed in some cases, you could almost see that as growing. Like, the human service is increasingly premium, the AI service is increasingly inexpensive, and certainly everyone in the industry providing the kind of more bespoke and higher quality automatic services, you feel the competitive pull from something like free captions over Zoom, Teams, and other platforms. There's really you need to kind of demonstrate incremental value, because the price that some of the commodity platforms place on this, is literally free. Whatever Teams can do automatically for your captioning in a meeting, it will do for free.
Yeah, and what's interesting is that I find the most useful thing for me is I use a product called Simon Says for a lot of the stuff that we have, and what it doesn't do is hit all the words correctly all the time. What it does do is get them perfectly timed. So it gets 90%, 95% perfectly timed, and I'm happy to have someone just go through and fix the words that it got wrong, because when I have a human doing it, there's a little wow and flutter that happens in timing, just because they're typing something a little slower or faster. And so, and I can pay someone a lot of money to fix that, but I find that it's a pretty fast thing to just have, someone go through it and fix that piece. Do you think, in broadcast, there is a requirement which drives why there's so many captioners that can do English and Spanish? But do you think that those requirements, those stringent requirements that are in broadcast, will eventually make their way to social media for publicly traded companies, for that type of thing? Do you think it gets to a point where they require it?
Yeah, it's a really interesting regulatory and kind of legal question, because there was an attempt in the U.S. to look at that question, maybe about 5 years ago, and of course the environment's already changed a lot. But what they wound up concluding was that you would be required to follow the FCC rules for captioning on television if you were broadcasting the same content that's on television, on a stream. So something like, for example, a service like Peacock or Hulu that kind of simulcast television. And they stopped short of saying, if you have a certain revenue for your programming, if you're a company of a certain size that does TV, they had trouble with this definition. I think their intent was not to regulate what you might think of as user-generated content, like grandma can't post clips of her kids without captioning them, without breaking the law, but they kind of, I think there was a desire to target professional productions that were kind of television successor productions, while excluding kind of more private stuff. And I think the regulatory authorities honestly are sort of confused about how to make that distinction work. But I wouldn't, it also, FCC operates on one level, but the other level regulatorily that's at play, like in the US, you have Americans with Disabilities Act, and Americans with Disabilities is very, very general. It says, essentially you need to provide a reasonable accommodation when reasonable, when possible, for pretty much any type of recognized disability, in a very broad sense. And so what's interesting about that is the FCC says you have to do captioning, you have to do it like this, it's prescriptive. ADA is like a general right, where there isn't a clear manual for exactly how to provide the accessibility or the accommodation. And that's actually what some of the, when you look at why is everything on Netflix captioned, it's really been more of a, to some extent, it's just a commercial motivation, but to some extent, it's been based on some ADA thought, oh, we need to make this platform accessible. We don't need to do it in a specific way, but we need to do what's reasonable and what's possible.
Showing effort goes a long way in keeping people from coming at you.
For sure.
because I mean, rightly so. I mean, I think that folks that need these services are pretty vocal, like, and companies take it pretty seriously to not have them, and if again, you want to at least be going down some path, and then there are some companies that really take this stuff seriously and push it really hard, and I think that they're benefiting from that. Next question.
Steve Voller in Minneapolis, Minnesota is up next. He says, our captioners have always been on location in the same room as the multiple speakers. If we move to remote captioning, such as iCap, how will accuracy be affected?
Go ahead, Bill.
Hopefully not very much, if at all. I mean, the latency on iCap is really quite low. I mean, you're probably talking about like a 500 millisecond type of latency, which in the overall context, as Alex alluded to, your transcriber is typically something like 3 or 4 seconds behind, just based on the fact that they need to hear your words, understand them, put that in a coherent context, and type it out on the system. So you're not really losing a very noticeable amount of additional time by going remote. I think the intelligibility of the audio in most contexts, I think, is going to be pretty unaffected. I mean, I heard, there was multiple speakers in the question. So, the intelligibility might be somewhat more affected if the environment is chaotic. For example, if it's a town board meeting and people shout questions from the audience, and, that type of environment could be more challenging. But I think, honestly, losing quality on that probably should not be significant. I mean, based on, unless the context is exceptional.
Yeah, I've managed maybe thousands, but definitely high hundreds of captioned events, one-off events, and there's only one company that brings them brings the captioners on site. so we use iCap heavily. We used to use Skype.
A lot more expensive.
Yeah, it's a lot more expensive. We only bring them on site for one company, and then everybody else iCap. Before iCap, we used Skype. Just had them just like watch the thing and hear it. That's why I had so many Skype boxes for a long time, was just for the captioners, and we didn't use them for anything else. But I think the iCap works extremely well. The biggest thing is just making sure you get ahead of it, so that you don't have any linkage issues between the captioner and the EEG. It's always been our thing. Like, if we haven't worked with that captioner before, or if they haven't, it's the linkage between the captioner and the hardware that's the hardest part. But once they're linked up, we find that it's very, very stable. And
you want to do something like a mic check with the captioner to make sure they know how to find you and all that. And I think
one weekday before your event, at least.
When you're a mobile production, essentially, you want to make sure you know what you're getting into as far as the networking that you have the caption encoder connected to. Certainly one class of dissatisfied customer that I think our support hears from is somebody who's kind of set up their kind of 4G modem in some location where they don't have great reception, and they've tried to connect the closed caption encoder to that, and they've just kind of gotten like intermittent connectivity. And again, it is based on the bedrock connectivity environment.
Next question.
Michael Flotron in Portland, Oregon is up next. He says, would I be able to send each speaker to you in a separate channel to help with multi-speaker situations? I use Dante for every input, and this would be fairly easy to do on his end.
Yeah, you can do that using our SDI product with different channels of embedded audio for each mic track, or with our transport stream product by putting each audio track in a different PID in the audio programs. The RTMP product doesn't support that because RTMP with multiple tracks of audio embedded is, let's say, experimental at best. But yeah, depending on what product you're doing, you do have options for that. And then each speaker track will have its own Lexi process driven to it, and you can label it, and they do arbitrate and produce a single caption track. So that's something that, if you're in the style of production where that's feasible, you can definitely get a great result that way.
That's great. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael up next asking this: are you using a GPU or similar to accelerate the AI, or does it run on the CPU?
The exact hosting on that isn't my special expertise. I mean, we use a couple of different services, and like not a lot of those services honestly are vendor services even. So we're not directly doing all of the hosting on this. I mean, the other thing about the speech to text AI in general is that what's real, I mean, we do provide, for example, an on-prem local product that does the Lexi local product, and it's just a CPU, and it's not a fancy mega server, and it works really well. I mean, I would say there's very little gap between that and our cloud-based product. And I think the key is that actually when you train these models, you need a lot of computing resources to do a lot of training. To actually use the model, it's designed to work really with low latency and limited processing power. So the training is the part that's GPU intensive and that requires a lot of resources. And to actually run the thing, I mean, you don't need anything too exotic to run the model.
Next question.
Stan Chan is up next. He's got some unfamiliar acronyms for me, so I hope I get them right. What do you use for the NER model for the measure of accuracy for your service when most use the WER model for NLP applications? How much does your service leverage natural language understanding to forward correct on context?
I think it's why. Why do you use the NER versus the WER?
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, that's so, this is NER is a scoring that, is developed academically in the last few years. And essentially WER is easy. WER says, its word error rate. It says, let's take a quote, perfect transcript. Let's compare it to your ASR or human transcript. Let's mark every word that's different as different, and let's ask what percentage of the words were different. And let's say that the lower the percentage of words is different, the better, obviously. So NER, there's some behind that simplicity. There's
and NER is named entity recognition. So I think.
What is it?
I think it's named entity recognition.
I don't know if it does stand for that. I'm kind of blanking on what the acronym's from, but really it's a similar concept to a word error rate, but it's based on conceptual blocks. So it doesn't score a problem if the phrase is substantially the same from the point of view of meaning. And it kind of looks at everything through that lens. And especially that can be relevant with something like punctuation, which we touched on briefly before. Like it's kind of do we want to talk about where the commas belong in this sentence, or are there potentially multiple styles that would be meaning equivalent, that would be readable, that would provide no problem to the viewer, And I think so NER in a sense it's harsher on word errors that are meaning impacting. It recognizes the difference between kind of trivial words or paraphrases that maybe even help the meaning, and the difference between misidentifying a number, a person, a key fact. The highest deduction in NER is for a category called incorrect information, where essentially the sentence is coherent, it's complete, it's wrong. Would be someone viewing this an absolutely wrong fact or impression. That's kind of why we go through NER, because, for example, in a sports game, an excellent stenographer who's a trained captioner can score relatively poorly on a literal word error rate score, because they're like kind of paraphrasing and helping with the context, and they're actually trained to do that. And the NER doesn't penalize that, the word error rate does. And at the same time, the NER actually can come down quite hard on some of the problems that bad ASR will give you, like that it starts talking about out of context, irrelevant, even offensive subjects in the context that they have nothing to do with. And a WER doesn't just says, oh, one word wrong, and NER slams you for that. It says, oh, this is completely confusing and inaccurate. This has nothing to do with the conversation. So that's the value of the NER approach. And we do at AI Media have kind of in Australia, it's actually mandated to use the NER approach to grade your captioning for regulatory purposes. And so we have a trained team that actually goes and does that according to the Australian standards. And I think even where not regulated, it is often the better approach, with the understanding that it's more difficult for just untrained people to implement off the top of their heads, you know?
And by the way, it's number, addition error, recognition error is according to Wikipedia.
Why wouldn't we know that? It's now it all makes sense.
It's easier just to say NER. All right, yeah. And it does seem like that NER is a more meaningful number than WER. So,
well, that's the intent. In every system, you know, you can argue the model is perfect or imperfect, but it certainly is a more thoughtful model than simply marking each word as right or wrong.
Yeah. Next question.
I just feel a little better about messing up the acronyms. Jesse Mills, San Francisco Bay Area. Would adding additional CC match delay over 4 seconds, would that allow the ICAP captioners more time and potentially increase accuracy?
Yes, if you told someone that you were going to do that, that might be able to help. It's true that with, you know, any type of transcription process, whether, you know, the human captioners are used to working a certain way and might, you know, kind of, you know, they might or might not be immediately able to go, oh, if I have 1 extra second to do this transcription, I can think a little harder and make it a little more perfect rather than rushing. I mean, in theory, that will help them perform, whether that's what they're used to doing day to day. To immediately put that into action for you could be a kind of individual to individual thing. But yeah, basically this feature that's being referred to it's in our SDI product, and it's similar to what Alex was saying about the YouTube HTTP. It allows you to match the delay of the caption to the delay of the video. Essentially, it's a video audio delay inside the caption encoder that allows you to delay the video audio to match the caption delay. So
how big is that buffer? We've never really used it that much.
I think we have up to 10 seconds, which you really shouldn't need in any case more than 10 seconds. Yeah.
Very slow captioner. That would be me if I was captioning. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next. He says, could you feed audio into your product via Dante or SoundGrid?
I don't believe we could directly. I'm not so familiar with SoundGrid. I know that our Alta product supports 211030 audio, which I know has some similarity to Dante, but I'm not sure. I don't think that's directly compatible, right? Because I think it's directly compatible with the AES67, which is not Dante. But you might be able to get that to work with 211030 would probably be the closest suggestion.
And we almost always try to deliver to the caption hardware, if we're using hardware, in an embedded SDI stream, because we want everything to get there on time. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael up next. He says, does your product run on its own dedicated appliance, or can it be virtualized in VMware or a similar hypervisor?
Yes, it can be virtualized. So, I mean, that's as we kind of talked about at the top of the hour, the HD 492s and similar products is an SDI appliance, and the Alta product is basically a virtualization of that product that will work with an MPEG transport stream or with 2110. And so the Alta product is basically, we can ship that to you in a similar form factor, but what's probably most commonly done is to get it as a software VM hosted in VMware or another hypervisor, or, to get it as an AMI and hosted in the cloud.
And the most of my work, I mean, 9% of my work has been with the hardware.
Well, and that, that's like, right, that's the world of the production right now in a very general sense. Like, it's kind of like, what are you going to do for an ad hoc event? Are you going to use SDI, or are you going to set up a 2110 network or something? And I think we know that if you're a fixed installation for a major broadcast channel, you can move to IP and be successful. But is that where it needs to be to kind of enable a live event?
Right. No, absolutely. I think it's the last question for the hour.
It is. Douglas Carmichael gets the honor, and he says, can your product run in the cloud? And he specifies Amazon Web Services or Azure, and receive an NDI stream.
So NDI is an interesting case, because we've gotten questions for a lot of years on wanting to support captioning in NDI. And the problem is that the NDI standard actually doesn't include a closed captioning output. So we don't actually have a way to create the captioning in NDI and to transport it into the switcher or onto other products. So, having had some conversations, with the product managers there. And I think, the suggested approach is more like, okay, handle captioning more as your transmission distribution side rather than inside your production side. But I think that's not always the most convenient thing to do. So essentially in the NDI world, you have to go into something like SDI or Transport Stream or 2110 that has a clear caption standard, because in NDI, we don't actually have a way to pass those captions in a defined way through the NDI switcher so that it stays with the video into the output. So if it was just about taking the NDI audio, I'd say we should make the product do that. But the problem is, what's the output?
Yeah. And theoretically, you could strip the audio out in the cloud and pass it to one of your products, right? In AWS or Azure.
Well, right. Like if you're in AWS and you're using the Alta product, then you just need to give it either a transport stream with the audio or a 211030. We have a lot of people who use Media Connect to, convert from all kinds of other wrappers. Say you have a Zixi or something like that going long distance. So you'll convert from a Zixi to something more like a basic transport stream and put that in for the caption.
Yeah, absolutely. Bill, thank you so much for your time. It was a good geek fest on captioning.
Oh, good. Thank you. This is a lot of fun, actually. Knowledgeable crew, great questions.
Yeah, we might try to bring you back. We're going to talk about this every couple months. And there might be other questions or things we're trying to figure out. But it's really a pleasure to have you here.
Good. Thank you. Hopefully, we'll have it all figured out by then and get some great answers.
Never. We'll never figure out captions. We'll just struggle through them and do the best we can. All right. Thanks to our producers for all the great questions. Really great conversation. And thank you to our panelists. Can't do this without you. It's great to have you here. Thanks for the great answers that we had in the first hour and being part of the second hour. And now we will continue our conversation for the next 21 hours until the next one with After Hours. So let's go ahead and goodbye. See you tomorrow.